Welcome, beautiful souls. Anyone who has gone through a spiritual awakening knows it can be an incredibly painful experience. Though the rewards of becoming spiritually awakened are great, the journey there is often fraught with pain and suffering. Why is this? In this video, we'll explore some of the main reasons why spiritual awakening can be so painful and what you can do to ease the process. Before we can talk about why spiritual awakenings are so painful, we have to discuss the physical, mental, and emotional pain people experience during an awakening. The physical pain of a spiritual awakening can be pretty intense. Many people report feeling like they are going through withdrawal as they detox from the lower vibrational energies that have been holding them back. This process can be extremely uncomfortable, with symptoms including headaches, nausea, and fatigue. However, it is essential to remember that this pain is only temporary. Once you have reached a higher level of consciousness, you will no longer be subject to the same lower vibrational energies. In fact, you may even find that your physical health improves as a result of your spiritual awakening. Mental pain during an awakening can take many forms. One of the most common is anxiety. As you begin to see the world more clearly, you may become anxious about all of the problems that exist in society. You may also become anxious about your own life and what you are doing with it. It is not uncommon for people to feel like they are going crazy during an awakening. This is because your mind is bombarded with new information and is trying to make sense of it all. Emotional pain is one of the most common types of pain people experience during a spiritual awakening. This can manifest as feeling overwhelmed by emotions, feeling unsupported by those around you, or feeling like you're just plain old stuck. Emotional pain can be incredibly frustrating because it can feel like no matter what you do, you just can't seem to escape it. However, the good news is that emotional pain is often a sign that you are progressing on your spiritual journey. The reason is that when we first awaken spiritually, we tend to be very attached to our ego self. This attachment can cause us to experience a lot of suffering because we constantly try to protect and defend our ego self. As we release our attachment to our ego self, we experience less emotional pain. So if you're going through a lot of emotional pain right now, it's a good sign that you're on the right track. I wish spiritual awakening could be all flowers and rainbows, but the truth is, it's not. I thought something was wrong with me for a long time because the process was so incredibly painful. So let's take a look at 9 reasons why spiritual awakening is so painful. Number 1. Old wounds start to surface, and you're forced to deal with them head on. A spiritual awakening is often an intensely painful experience. It can feel like all the rug has been pulled out from under you, leaving you feeling lost, confused, and alone. This is because an awakening forces you to confront your deepest and darkest truths, often referred to as our shadow self. These are the parts of ourselves that we have been hiding away, often for many years. And when they come to the surface, it can be a very confronting and scary experience. It's easy to ignore the parts of ourselves that we don't like or that make us uncomfortable. But when faced with them head-on, it's hard to deny their existence. This process of facing our shadow selves can be incredibly painful, but it is also necessary for our spiritual growth. Without it, we would remain stuck in our old patterns and behaviors, never truly moving forward on our spiritual journey. Number 2. Change isn't easy. Most people resist change at all costs. Even I used to be one of those people. We like our lives to be comfortable and predictable, even if that means staying in a place of pain and suffering. But the truth is that change is inevitable. It's an essential part of life. Without it, we would never grow or evolve. Spiritual awakenings often come with a lot of internal and external change. And for many of us, this can be tricky to adjust to. We may have to let go of old beliefs and ways of thinking that no longer serve us. We may have to end relationships that are no longer healthy. Our whole way of life will likely change as we start to live more authentically. This is never easy, but it is always worth it because it can lead to a much happier and more fulfilling life. Number 3. You start to see through the illusions that you've been living in. Imagine this: you've lived in a beautiful house for many years. You love this house. It's your home. But one day, you start to notice that the walls are cracked, the roof is leaking, and the foundation is slowly crumbling. You start to see that this house is not as perfect as you thought it was. At this point, you have two choices. You can either ignore the problems and continue living in denial, or you can face the truth and start looking for a new home. For many of us, our egos are like that crumbling house. We build them up to be this perfect, invincible thing, but in reality, they are full of cracks and flaws. And when we start to see through the illusions we've been living in, it can be a very painful experience. When you go through a spiritual awakening, what you once thought was true really starts to unravel before your eyes. Your belief system is challenged, and everything you thought you knew is called into question. This can be a very disorienting and confusing time, but it is also an essential part of our spiritual journey. Without this process of questioning and deconstruction, we would never be able to create something new and better in our lives. Number 4. You no longer fit into the box that you once did. If you've ever tried to fit a square peg into a round hole, you know how frustrating it can be. It just doesn't work. And yet, that's often what we try to do with our lives, force ourselves into a mold that just doesn't fit. We try to live up to other people's expectations or fit into a role we're uncomfortable with. But when we start to awaken spiritually, we realize that we don't have to do that anymore. We can start to create our own path in life that is authentic to who we are. This can be a very liberating experience, but it can also be very scary. We may have to give up things that are familiar to us or venture into the unknown, but ultimately it is always worth it because it leads to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Number 5. Relationships may fall apart. One of the most challenging things about spiritual awakening is that it can often lead to the end of relationships, both romantic and platonic. This is because, as we start to grow and change, we may no longer be compatible with the people we are currently close to. We may realize that we no longer share the same values or goals. We may simply outgrow them. It's hard saying goodbye to someone who was once an essential part of our lives, but sometimes it is necessary to create space for new and more authentic relationships. Number 6. It's easy to feel isolated. Going through a spiritual awakening has to be one of the loneliest experiences a person experiences. This is because, during this time, we often question everything we once held to be true. We may feel like we have no one to turn to, because no one else seems to understand what we're going through. Friends and family may not be able to relate to us, and we may feel like we are entirely alone. But it's important to remember that there are others out there who are going through the same thing. You are not alone in this experience, even if it may sometimes feel that way. No one can understand exactly what you're going through because every spiritual awakening is different. But that doesn't mean there aren't people who can provide support and love. Finding your kindred spirits is one of the most important things you can do during this time. Number 7. The people closest to you may not understand. As I've mentioned, people who are close to you may not be able to understand what you're going through. They may think that you're going through a phase or just being difficult. And while it's essential to have patience with the people in your life, sometimes it's necessary to take a step back and give yourself some space. It's okay to distance yourself from people who don't understand what you're going through. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life right now. Focus on surrounding yourself with people who love and support you, and who will be there for you no matter what. Number 8. The world may seem like a dark place. When most people think of spiritual awakening, they think of it as a time of growth and light. And while it can be both of those things, it's important to remember that it is also a time of great darkness. As we question everything we once held to be true, we may realize that the world is not as perfect as we thought it was. We may see the darkness and pain in the world and feel overwhelmed by it. But it's important to remember that the light always exists, even in the darkest of times. Eventually, we will find our way back to the light. Number 9. You experience a spiritual death, in which all that is false within you dies. To experience a spiritual awakening, we often go through a period of death and rebirth. This is because, to awaken spiritually, we have to let go of all that is no longer serving us. We must release our attachment to the things holding us back, and allow ourselves to be reborn. It is a painful and challenging process, but it is necessary to grow. Spiritual awakening can be a difficult and painful process, but it is necessary to grow. It is important to remember that you are not alone in this experience, and that there are people who can provide support and love. Eventually, we will find our way back to the light. If you are currently going through a spiritual awakening, I encourage you to be patient with yourself and to surround yourself with people who love and support you. You may be wondering what happens after you've gone through the pain of a spiritual awakening and what comes next. Well, you can find out more about what comes after a spiritual awakening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with others who may be going through a similar experience. Thank you for watching. Go with love. Let love guide you, not fear.